Okay, so today for our final session, we're going to be discussing part 3 of Other People's Words, The Cycle of Low Literacy by Victoria Purcell Gates. And part 3 is going to include chapters 7 through 9, and then we're going to do a little bit of I'm going to kind of pose some discussion questions about what we can do, what we can take away from the book. Okay? So to start off, we start out talking about, this is kind of like the aftermath, the cultural aspects of this book. It really delves into that, and some of the barriers that were set up because of the cultural aspects. So it kind of is going to go back into what happened a little bit earlier, but it's going to pull out some important details. So we know from earlier in the book that Donnie was expected to fail first grade. So that's where this kind of picks up. He was expected to fail first grade, and they moved him on the second. And Jenny didn't want that to happen because Jenny thought she had talked to the teacher. She thought that they understood her, that he couldn't go on. And Gates thought the same thing. She thought that he also shouldn't go on, that there was, I have it written down, he needed to catch up to the curriculum. So he was just behind what you were supposed to learn in second grade. He shouldn't have gone on. And I don't really believe in retention, but I think that's a really good case for retention. He could not he just couldn't do it, But they moved him on up to second, and they did the same thing for third grade. And Jenny, who is Donnie's mother, was just irate. Why would you move she was she was so mad. Why would they move her son up without even asking her? They told her that he was going to fail. They told her he was going to fail twice. She came in with the expectation that he was going to fail twice, and they just passed him along. She was a very concerned parent, like we've mentioned before. She just couldn't read, so she didn't really be able to interact well with the school on the level that they needed her to and thought that she should be able to. They weren't meeting her, and she didn't know how to meet them and interact with them. So she called, she would stop by, she would try to meet with the principal, and the secretary would always say that he was out, he was on playground duty, he was this, he was that. He wouldn't meet with her. He was just straight up not going to talk to this poor parent. They were absolutely avoiding her. And one of her big concerns and that she voiced to Victoria Gates, were that she was passed along like this, her husband was passed along like this, and it didn't matter if they really failed that grade. The school didn't care. They just wanted to get rid of them. They didn't want to try to reach these kids at their level or teach them. And that was all because of a cultural expectation of urban Appalachians. Urban Appalachians, they were dumb. They didn't learn. They didn't care about education. They didn't care about reading. They didn't need that. So why try to teach it to them? But that was just so wrong. It was just a misconception that had just perpetuated itself and rolled and rolled and rolled along until it became so bad that they weren't even trying to teach these kids, just because of their accent in this area. It's just terrible. Jenny wanted Donnie to fail, like I said, and so did Gates. They both thought he needed to catch up to the curriculum, which again I think he had to fail, he just wasn't there at all, and they knew that. And as a teacher, I could see that, I don't like retention, and I'm agreeing with them, but these teachers just didn't care. The principal didn't care, the board didn't care, nobody cared. The school wanted to pass him along, and so they don't have to deal with him. And he only got held back into the second grade, so he got passed along first grade, nothing happened, and then whenever he got passed along to third grade, that's when Dr. Gates interfered. She called the principal and was like, I would like to request a meeting, and she told him who she was, and he was like, oh, that's not a big deal, we don't need a meeting, he will be held back. Just like that. Jenny had been trying for 2 years for him to get held back, and he wouldn't listen to her, and it was all because of her accent, because of who she was, because of who they thought she was, She was a very concerned parent, obviously, and they didn't care, because they didn't want to think she was. Alright, let me turn to page 160, because I have a quote for us here. Alrighty, so this is more on the same subject. As noted in Chapter 2, urban Appalachians are widely viewed by school personnel as unfit parents who care little for education. Therefore, Jenny, as a concerned mother, did not exist. So that's what I've been saying. She was a concerned mother, and because she had that accent, because she looked like an urban Appalachian, because she was poor, because of where she lived, because of who she was, they assumed she wasn't. She couldn't be. Why would she be concerned? So, poor Jenny. She tried as hard as she could. So the second grade year, teachers, they kept sending homework, and this had happened before in his first grade year. In his first second grade year, teachers kept sending homework that neither Jenny or Donnie could do. And Jenny kept telling him, kept telling the teachers that I can't help him with this work because I can't read well enough to help him, She just couldn't. You can't send home homework and expect a kid to do it if they can't do it, and especially if the parent can't help them do it. It was just, oh my gosh, such a crazy disconnect that I just can't even imagine, But thinking of it from the teacher's perspective, I don't know, this kid needs to be doing this work, Maybe Donnie could do it if somebody else would help him, not the mom, like if the teacher could orally read the instructions. So in that case, homework just should not have been sent home. But Jenny kept telling him, again, she was a concerned parent. She would verbalize her concerns. She wouldn't write them because she couldn't write very well. But she would tell the teachers and the principal and the secretary and everybody she couldn't help Donnie. And they didn't care. They just kept giving him Fs. They kept giving him Fs. They would fail him. They would write on his report card, does not try. He didn't know how to do it. So, of course, he didn't try, Jenny didn't know how to help him. And I'm sure there was some angst that was kind of expressed there from both of them because they couldn't do it. And, you get mad whenever you can't do something and people just keep expecting you to be able to do it. So, I'm sure some of that did not try. They perceived that bad attitude for him just not wanting to try, but really he didn't know how to try, And that just, poor Jenny, she's just, I feel bad for her this whole book. Another quote from the book. It's on page 163. Members of this invisible minority were seen as failures from the beginning, including Donnie at age 7. At age 7, they considered him a failure. Failures that, as the educational hierarchy perceived it, continue to plague urban schools and make them look bad. So these urban schools, they didn't want these urban Appalachians in their school. They were rural, they were poor, they were country. We don't need them here. They're not part of our group. This whole culture that was an invisible minority, they didn't even want to deal with, They knew they were there. They just didn't want to deal with them. So, and they considered them failures to begin with just by who they were, and like generations of just bad luck or trying to fit in urban environments and absolutely not fitting in urban environments. That's a lot of urban Appalachians issues. All right, Jenny's accent made people assume things. So because of the way she talked, people from the get-go, they thought she was ignorant. As one teacher said, as soon as she opened her mouth, I knew she was ignorant, which is just the rudest thing I've ever heard in my life, because of her accent. And she was ignorant of reading and writing, but she was not ignorant of how to care for her child, She was not ignorant of a lot of things. And written bureaucratic text excluded her. So the letters that the school would send home, this is another big point, she would bring to Dr. Gates, and Dr. Gates would read them for her. And one time Donnie got suspended, and she didn't even know it because she couldn't read the letter, and the school needed to hear from her, and she would never have known any of that if she couldn't have read the letter, which is what Dr. Gates taught her how to do, By the end of their sessions, Jenny could read enough to kind of get by. But the language of the text wasn't verbal communication or it wasn't casual. It was used bureaucratic words and stuff that Jenny just didn't have in her vocabulary. So that excluded her as well. They were writing it for a different demographic, not for Jenny. She needed to be literate enough, and so did Donnie, to breach the wall that the school had put up between her and her child's education, between Donnie and his education. And that's what Gates really sought to do. And by the end of the book, they both were, like I've said before, they weren't perfect. They were not reading at a very high level, but they were functional by the end of Dr. Gates' time with them. And I'm sure she continued to be an influence in their lives, for everyone after that. In the book, Gates uses the terms foreigners and outsiders. Those are really good terms to describe the people who have difficulty learning to read and write because of maybe their language, because of their culture, like Donnie and Jenny. They were urban Appalachians. They were just excluded naturally. Nobody cared to teach them how to read and write. So those are naturally the people who don't learn how to read and write. And this last section is about culture and kind of what it meant in the school system. Schools, so this was a few years ago, like maybe 20 years ago, I think. It feels like it should be only 10, but it was written in 1998, so like over 20 years ago. Schools excluded these groups, but schools now, hopefully, some places, are more open to minorities and anybody who's coming there to learn. Schools need to be open to all cultures, and they need to teach family literacy as well, is another point that Gates points out. Family literacy would be like, including Jenny in Donnie's education, or like sending home stuff for Jenny to learn how to read at the same time that Donnie was learning how to read. The school could have handled that, Dr. Gates didn't. She stepped in whenever Jenny came to her wanting to learn how to read. The school could have helped Jenny learn how to read, but they didn't care either. So family literacy in that aspect, and also in sending home stuff for the parent to help the child read with. Like maybe if another parent, she knew how to read, she just didn't have any books to read to her son at night, or she didn't even know she needed to read a book at night to her kid, So if the school could send home stuff like that, or like writing materials so she could help him write stuff like that. So it goes a whole bunch of different ways. Jenny and Donnie, like I said, they slowly breached the wall. They kind of made it. They were always going to have struggles, but after Gates's help, they were way farther along than they were before. So what can we do? Family involvement, like I said, so like the Title I nights that schools have, those are good, but I think they need to be like meaningful. They can motivate kids to read, and they can want to come because they want to read and they want to get a book and they want to earn a prize at the family involvement night, but they need to reach the parents too. They need to have some incentive for those parents to come there and help their kids, or something to give the parents to take home to help their kids, especially poverty-stricken families, which we have a lot of in our area. We need to know our students. These teachers, maybe they did know Donnie. Maybe we need to care about our students, which I just think is natural for a teacher, But we need to know when these kids are failing and do something about it. Like, this is insane. These teachers just kept passing him along. That's not right. So we need to know your students. You need to know where they're struggling. You need to know, you need to try things to help them struggle, or help them get through the struggle. So knowing your students, family involvement. And Gates also points out the importance of emergent literacy and that stage, and how having print in your life can just make a world difference, because Donnie did not, because Jenny just didn't know, she didn't know she needed to be doing that. So having print in your life when you're learning, when you're in that emergent stage, when you're just barely learning how to read, can just turn the whole thing around, because this was like a perfect case study on how not having it in your life makes you not know how to read at all, So it was just a really good example of what the difference emergent literacy, like the difference print in emergent literacy can make. All right, so that's our last part of the book. I hope you've enjoyed this book. I think it's very good. Alrighty, thank you.